Welcome back, everyone. I am the Depressed Dealer, and this is Middara. This session is just going to be going over rule stuff as well as some of the lore stuff on the back of cards. So no gameplay this time. There's a lot to kind of go over. It's been a while since I've recorded Middara. As always, I usually kind of record in bulk because I enjoy playing this game so much. I actually had a lot more parts after this one, or not after this one, but after this battle here. And I got partway through chapter 4. My intention was to play through chapter 4 blind, but I ran into a lot more rules questions as well as mistakes as I went through it, and eventually I decided that it would been better to just go ahead and scrap those videos and just start over from this point. So I technically know what's coming up on chapter 4. I've also continued on with my own personal playthrough and got through most of chapter 4. I ran into a blocker where some of the hidden cards were missing. I believe that's been fixed, but I haven't had a chance to really continue playing on my personal playthrough yet. As always, I apologize about all mistakes I make. Unfortunately, they're kind of common. There's a lot of edge cases and there's a lot of fine print to go over. I do my best to read through the rule book, but going through every inch and every word of a rule book can be kind of difficult. Obviously, I have no intention on cheating, despite one person's accusations. It's just more me. It's more ignorance and failing to understand certain aspects of the rules. As always, feel free to give feedback. I know someone went through all my videos and gave small comments about various things I made mistakes on. Some of them I didn't really respond to simply because they were kind of inconsequential in the overall overall outcome of the encounter. But there were a few that definitely would have influenced some encounters. So let's go ahead and go over some of those. I think I already gone over Blighted Hendrix. I did mess up towards the end about one of the AI steps. He should have went after Damocles, I believe, and then that would have actually changed the flow of the combat a little bit. Overall, it still would have been probably my fight to win, but it was something I kind of noticed. So let's go over the big rule I messed up. So on these command cards and adventure cards, you can see that there's the little stamina thing there. It has 3 red dots and then 2 gray dots to represent that you gain 3 stamina per round and get up to a max of 5. Obviously, there's an exception with Damocles, which it actually mentions in the text, where it's 3 and 6. And then even command cards have it in the top right corner, though it's smaller. What I failed to notice was Femke and DM actually are set up as 2 and 4, not 3 and 5 like normal encounters. And I've been playing through a number of playthroughs with this rules mistake. This would have influenced the encounter before the fight against Aisling. It would have influenced the fight against Aisling, and it technically would have influenced the fight with Judas. Technically, it would have influenced a lot more than that, too. It would have influenced just about all my fights. I don't think it would have... I think the only ones where it would have made a significant difference was the Aisling fight, which obviously the Aisling fight, trying to beat her with raw damage is super, super difficult. And I kind of mentioned that some of these bosses are so difficult without summons or just in general that where you beat them, you kind of feel you end up questioning whether or not you broke some rule somewhere. And unfortunately, that was the situation with Aisling. I managed to defeat her with damage, and I found rules that I messed up on. One of them was the twin command cards were supposed to only gain 2 stamina per round and max out at 4. So yeah, I apologize. That's a big mistake. I did kind of comment about it in the Discord. Mentioned that, hey, majority of the time it's 3 and 5. Maybe you should include text just like with Damocles to show that it's different. They agree. Of course, they can't really change the print now because everything's being shipped right now. I believe my copy's on a boat right now. But yeah, kind of a significant error. The other significant error, I need to talk a little bit about a mistake I think I made in the past was Zeke with Nimble Fighter. I think originally I was treating his Nimble Fighter as kind of like an exhaust skill, where I treated like once per turn being like it hits his turn and then it doesn't refresh until the start of his next turn, kind of like an exhaust. But that's not how it worked. And I noted that with Zeke's ability, but I failed to note that with other factors in this game, namely Nimble. Nimble is per turn, which means you get a free dodge with +1 shield every turn. This alone makes Aisling just about impossible to defeat in some cases, because she's just going to dodge everything. Her defense is already really high. This would have influenced a lot of things, because Aisling also had every time she successfully dodged an attack or an attack misses her, she counters if she's in range, which her range was 4. So being able to dodge essentially every turn makes it so she can exponentially avoid a lot more attacks, as well as output a lot more damage, which can be really, really brutal. I mean, there's some ways to negate dodging, but you don't really have that many options in the at that point in the game, especially with how the game kind of shuffles your party around in that particular encounter. There's actually been a lot more feedback about Aisling. Now that I've noticed the rules I made mistakes on, I pretty much stated that she's by far the most powerful boss. Like, Judas is ridiculous, but Judas is ridiculous because of the time limit. Aisling's ridiculous because she literally has almost no weakness. Nimble makes it so her only weakness is she's unarmored. But you have to hit her, and if you miss, she can potentially pump 20 damage back into you and heal herself at the same time. So yeah, Aisling is pretty broken. She's still beatable. You can beat her by knocking her off a cliff really easy. There's definitely tricks for doing that. But defeating her with raw damage, good luck. If she was back down to 100 HP instead of 150, I would say, okay, it's maybe a very brutal DPS race. But at 150 at, common tier, I still think I might have been able to pull it off with the playthrough I was doing. I had pretty good control of the fight. But there was a good chance that there should have been a lot more counters against me. So it is what it is. Like, mistakes like this, I would usually probably restart my own playthrough. But for a Let's Play and for an audience, I'm just going to keep pressing onwards with what we have. So if that obviously turns you off and be like, I want a pure, legit playthrough, I completely understand. But I'm not going to start over because I don't want to put you guys through the same stuff again. And to be honest, if I were to start over, I would probably end up rushing and end up breaking some other rule or making some other rule mistake. So I intend on just keep pressing onward with the Aisling being defeated with raw damage, and just kind of go from there. So yeah, Nimble. So I guess to talk about as far as what a turn is, every figure gets a turn. So even on swarms, I used to think it was per card, but it's actually per figure. So that pretty much means that every as far as the Nimble mistake is concerned, I did this both ways. So Elify, DM, and Femke all should have had a lot more dodges because Nimble would have triggered every turn. Obviously, it was a bit more advantageous for bosses as opposed to me, but at least I was equal as far as how I treated it for both sides. I'll try to keep track of that in the future. So it's kind of ridiculous because per turn is really, really powerful. Because other things that are per turn are break attacks. That means you actually get a ton of break attacks in this game. Like if a swarm were to run by you, you would be able to attack every single one of them, because technically each one of them is a separate turn. There's probably a few other triggers involving turns, but I don't really remember them, to be honest. Another rule mistake I think I made was with Pit Boss. I, for some reason, thought that when it said if no one gets an exact match, I thought it was everyone had to get an exact match or everyone lost an Abraxas point. As long as one person makes it, everyone else is spared the damage. That was a mistake I made. I don't know if that really would have made a difference on in my Abraxas playthrough. To be honest, I don't really like Abraxas at all, so I kind of go through it and just expect to lose at this point. So it's a bit messy, to be honest. Give me one moment. Okay, some other mistakes I made. Living Ablation actually cast her spell 6 twice. It actually says cast it one time at highest total armor and then cast it again at lowest total. So I forgot to do that. I usually don't let a Living Ablation live long enough to actually cast that, get to that AI step. But it did happen, at least in just recently, as far as encounters are concerned. Also, there was I believe, a few red text where I misinterpreted the reading. I believe it was the one where I was trying to get the shotgun. I completely read it backwards. I thought it was if you were, um, whatever it was, I thought it was the opposite, and it ended up being wrong. But I think those are the major ones. There's some other ones where I probably maybe screwed up an AI step here and there, but other than that, I think that's all right. Like I said, the big ones were the mistake with the twins, stamina, and nimble, and technically break attacks as well. And well, anything that was per turn, I probably made a mistake on. Also, I guess in the case of dodging, even if the black die is not rolled, and the attack misses, that still counts as a successful dodge, even if you didn't actually attempt a dodge. So that's something to note as well. So anytime it says every time they successfully dodge an attack, let's see, yeah, like for the Spirit Blade here, the first time each turn it successfully dodges an attack, even if it didn't dodge, which it would because it has nimble, it would still trigger that. And like I mentioned before, each turn, let's see, first time each turn it happens. So each turn he would get the nimble and be able to get the counter when it successfully dodges. So some of these cards are actually a lot messier than they appear. As always, like I said, if there's any like rules mistakes, feel free to mention them. Don't just tell me to read the rulebook, because I have read the rulebook and it's also been the rulebook has been changed. There's the ever-expanding errata. Everyone's been giving feedback, and they've been trying to polish things up. Unfortunately, since everything's already been printed out, everything's kind of being reliant on PDFs and the ever-growing errata. So I'm doing the best with what I got. Like I said, I'm playing this by myself for this playthrough, and it's a lot to keep up with. I'm a part of another group that's all the way through. It's almost done with Chapter 3, so I'm getting a bit of experience both playing with others, which is a lot of fun. I think that's it as far as rule stuff. There's probably something else somewhere that I may have made a mistake on. There was definitely some stuff in the future that I made mistakes on, which is part of the reason why I scrapped those recordings. So from this point on, I'll be continuing as normal. There was one thing about whenever you get a new party member and it says to set the active group. I believe that was what happened when we picked up Damocles, permanently, that is. Technically, I could have swapped gear at that point, so I could have swapped the Brooding Mantle with the Barbed Breastplate and stuff when I was setting up the active group. So when you get a new character and it says set the active group, you can freely trade gear at that point with people that are present. Okay, I think that's everything. I'm going to go ahead and go over story stuff. Actually, I did forget one other thing, rules-wise. This one was actually against me. Anytime there's a summon already on the board, like when an encounter starts with a summon like a Spirit Blade, the one that's already on the board actually does drop. It does actually produce a loot card. Anything that's summoned otherwise to the board, besides totems, of course, like, for example, Living Ablation or, Living Ablation is kind of the big one. Anytime it summons something, those don't drop loot. But if there's already a Spirit Blade or any other Esper on the board, that does drop a loot card, unless it says otherwise. Okay, now I believe it's all the rules have been taken care of. So let's go ahead and dive right into this. We'll go ahead and start with Corpse Collector. What lurks beneath the surface? Corpse collectors are aquatic carnivorous plants. Their stationary existence means they do not need much food to survive, usually feeding only once or twice a month on unwary animals or carcasses that tributaries carry into their pools. Though filter feeders by nature, corpse collectors will sometimes hunt more actively, grasping with long tentacles and pulling victims into their large, toothy mouths. They will also fiercely attack anything that intrudes on their habitats. A single large flower blooms on top of a stalk that sprouts from a corpse collector's gaping maw. The flower is referred to as a Gilded Lotus, named for its unsurpassed beauty. The petal, stamen, and pistil of the Gilded Lotus have many rare and powerful alchemical properties. There are many potent enchantments that require parts of the Gilded Lotus to produce, and its pollen gives off an alluring pheromone. The corpse collector uses the pollen to attract prey, lowering its inhibitions and making it clumsy and careless. As such, it is a powerful aphrodisiac. When a corpse collector dies, the flower's roots grow beyond its decaying body, burrowing into the ground below. Because the Gilded Lotus flower can survive for years after the corpse collector dies, the allure of the substantial profit draws many adventurers to the brink of dangerous waters. It can be difficult to tell from the surface if the corpse collector of a particular flower is actually deceased. The Gilded Lotus emits a cloudy sap from its base that often obscures the view of the water below. Many have died trying to collect a lotus, only to find that the corpse collector was still very much alive. The sap that the lotus emits is not only used as a natural defense, but is also vital to the survival of many aquatic creatures. Without the nutrients provided by the lotus, many of the plants and animals that depend on the corpse collector die off. Because of this essential role, aquatic life instinctively protect the corpse collector from perceived threats. Living ablation. Prisoner of desperation. It is in our darkest moments that we are the most vulnerable. There are creatures that know this and try to exploit the weakness and despair of human beings. Sometimes these creatures begin espers attempting to flee their realms covertly. Other times they are more nefarious creatures seeking a disposable body as a means to an end. Whatever their motives, these creatures search for sorrow, hopelessness, loss, and desperation. It is in such a moment that an individual may find themselves confronted by a creature offering their deepest wish, something to save them from their pitiful state. In return, they will be willing to take the ultimate sacrifice, surrendering complete control of their body. When driven to the brink of sanity, this offer is sometimes accepted, and once the bargain is struck, there is no going back. The demon coils up inside its new human form, seizing control from the soul that dwells there. The host is transformed into a living oblation. To most, this one-sided deal may seem impossibly stupid. In reality, these offers are not made unless the esper knows the subject is likely to accept. Impossible rewards can be promised in exchange for their single life. When a person stands to lose the people they love or the heritage they built, giving themselves up can seem like the only solution within reach. Whatever their reason, these victims made a deal. They chose to enter the contract and let an esper control their bodies. Now they are subjugated, prisoners in their own bodies. If a living oblation is identified, it will defend itself to the death. It's not uncommon for a living oblation to live a normal, human life for years, emulating the person whose body they took until finally being found out by a loved one. The only way to save an individual from this fate is to make the entity that has control of the body a better offer. This is rarely done, and the living oblation is usually killed or driven away to be hunted by the great bounty. Spirit Blade, strangely sentient. In the realms beyond Middara, powerful creatures dabble in the art of animating weapons to their own ends. While granting sentience to inanimate objects isn't necessarily impossible in schools of magic known to Middarans, it certainly comes with philosophical implications that many are uncomfortable with. For this reason, many kingdoms in Middara strictly control the access of magic dedicated to granting the spark of life. Many see this as an interference by those who still cling to their religious beliefs from Earth, or even native religions on Middara. The truth is that these restrictions aren't really because of religious faith, but the terrible consequences that often result from misuse. Because of this, the wealthy and powerful keep this magic as secret as possible. Spirit blades are weapons forged to serve their masters in battle and granted sentience to increase their abilities. While a spirit blade doesn't always take the form of a sword, this word spirit blade is universally applied to any weapon given sentience in this manner. Their whole existence is battle. It was their reason for their creation, and the only desire their creators imbued them with. Despite their valiant service, they are often discarded when their masters forge newer, smarter, and more effective weapons. Then they are left to wander, searching for meaning to their existence. To this end, many spirit blades allow themselves to be summoned as espers. They are often summoned by novice practitioners of assemblage, as their only demand is typically to fight. As long as there is an enemy, a spirit blade will be ready and willing. Some spirit blades eventually move away from a life of combat, but most struggle to find a place in society. Some find work in agriculture, and given their effectively infinite lifespans, they are occasionally found serving as historians and record keepers. Blighted Guardian. Parasitic horror. The Blighted Guardian is a mockery of the human body, a twisted shadow of the person that it once was. Sickly ichor oozes from its orifices, each drop sizzling when it hits the ground. When travelers first encountered these monsters in the southern wilderness, they simply noted them down on the long list of menaces that made founding cities there impractical and dangerous. It wasn't until people wounded by Blighted Guardians began to develop the same symptoms that it became apparent that the Blighted Guardians were not native monsters to Middara, but the result of a parasite. The blood of a Blighted Guardian is highly acidic. Worse, infected individuals are covered in weeping sores that coat their bodies with this corrosive fluid. Even a simple touch from a blighted creature can be deadly. Some people are resistant to the parasite. Unfortunately, there is no way to predict who will be immune without subjecting someone to the infection. It is unknown whether or not the host actually dies from the blight. Some scholars speculate the parasite only takes control of the body, leaving the mind captive in a withering husk. This has difficult and unpleasant implications for dealing with these creatures. Many of those who lose loved ones argue that a cure might one day be found, and those infected might be locked up until the time. Others insist that they are nothing but corpses under the control of a dangerous parasite. Researchers have found that the infected kept in captivity occasionally become lucid, screaming the names of people they once knew, or even begging for death. This lends some weight to the idea that these creatures are still truly human inside and perhaps could be saved. Unfortunately, there is no known cure. The Kingdom of Elenia is most affected by the blight and has many financial incentives to find some remedy. They have even tasked specialized groups with developing a cure, so far without success. Alright, I believe we haven't done a Gary's. I believe we unlocked him during Chapter 3. Meaning and existence. The world is an evil place. Order is the only path to peace, while chaos is the bane of all honest creatures. Many have a warped worldview with misguided concepts of right and wrong. They base their opinions on their own limited perception, as if they are the only important creatures in existence. From only two eyes, any truth outside of their perception might as well not exist. My personal revelations have taught me wisdom no fallen creature could imagine. I must act on my own accord. Many will criticize me, and many will hate me. But I will not falter, nor will I relent. Inaction is no protection from harm. Wickedness thrives in the imagined mercy of the self-righteous. Purity of boundary brings purity of form. I don't write these things out of malice, or some misguided principle based upon blind obedience to childhood precepts. Instead, I write this from higher knowledge. I have seen things that many cannot comprehend. I've seen people die, families murdered, cities burned, kingdoms forgotten, countries sink, planets decay, and stars grow cold amid the whirling dark. I've seen a universe of infinite wonders and infinite horrors. Humans and those like them can only dream their imagined moral codes give reality meaning. They lack the context required to understand the true consequences of their decisions. Every action is a small stone, eventually growing into an avalanche. I'm told that the world isn't so black and white, that shades of gray line the spectrum of experience. This is an argument many use to find comfort in lives of sin and filth. They haven't seen the things I've seen. I take pity on them. Their fragile concepts of good and evil will shatter when the veil that covers their eyes finally lifts. In that moment, all living creatures will inevitably understand what I do. Their lives have meaning, and reality comes in only two colors. Justice. Wayward Theodosian Mage. Justice had a suburban life with loving parents and 3 brothers she loved. She excelled in school and was often hunched over a book in the library. She was a quiet girl, choosing to immerse herself in a good book over going to parties. This might not have given Justice many friends, but she didn't mind. Her life was nice and quiet, at least until the day the Harbingers came for her. While she was on her way home from school, a van pulled up beside her and a man tossed her roughly inside. This tactic of taking children from Earth is called smash and grab, and Harbingers are discouraged from employing such traumatic methods. Justice never found out if there was an emergency or if her Harbingers were just sloppy. But the next thing she knew, she was on Middara. From that point, Justice's world was turned upside down. The separation from her Earth family brought her pain, but her feelings were juxtaposed with the wonder of an incredible new life. Somewhere deep down, she couldn't help but feel excited. While the shock of being brought to a new world was still overwhelming, most of it was replaced with passionate curiosity when one of her wildest dreams come true. Justice was enrolled in a magical school. She was enthralled by magic and became obsessed with learning everything she could about it. This fearlessness, combined with her insatiable curiosity, led her to the Book of Theodosian. More importantly, it led the Book of Theodosian to her. With a will of its own, the book shows Justice as its new owner. This powerful artifact contained the keys to a long-forgotten art. Today, Justice travels with the Anointed, seeking to understand and eventually control her new abilities. Isla. Star-crossed siren. Faust, Isla said, do you regret what we've done? She looked uncertain and a little afraid. Of course not, Faust replied. I'm happier than I've ever been. What's the point of living forever if you can't be with the one you love? Isla smiled. The light fell between the trees as the afternoon sun moved across the forest canopy. She had never felt such peace with another person, not in Middara and certainly not in Akarla. Faust's kindness gave her peace she'd never known in the realm of her birth. Even knowing the terrible risk of their companionship couldn't make her regret it. This is where she belonged. Soon we'll find a place to settle down. Faust looked wistful as he stared out into the woods. No one will bother us. Plenty of people don't know that you're from Arkala, and even if someone found out, they wouldn't turn us in. We aren't the only ones who think the Great Bounty is unjust. I hope so. I couldn't stand it if you came to harm because of me, Isla whispered. She knew that the Great Bounty if the Great Bounty found out about them, they would both die. Forming a soul bond was risky, but Isla didn't want to live without Faust. It was the only way to hide her presence on Middara for anything longer than a brief visit. We'll take the future as it comes. Don't worry so much about it, Faust said confidently. He dug into his knapsack and retrieved a couple of sandwiches. Right now, let's enjoy the moment. The two sat in the shade, content to enjoy their lunch in the quiet of the afternoon. All right, Damocles, the boss version. Wrathful Mourner. Damocles crept warily down the stairs to the cellar. He hadn't felt safe in the manor since the attack. His mother's screams still echoed in his ears, and his nose still burned with the acidic tang the blooded guardian had left on the air. His joints ached, and there were bags under his eyes. He could endure only so much. Damocles knew it couldn't be an accident that the beast got inside. Someone was trying to do his family harm, but who? While every leader was bound to have enemies, the Hyde family was adored by the population of the little town they ruled. It made no sense. Damocles scanned the cellar shelves until he found the cask he was looking for. It was a good brandy, not too rare, but with a wonderful flavor. This would help the household relax. He knew that he needed to stay sharp in case of another incident, but that didn't mean the rest of the estate couldn't relieve the tension. He hefted the small cask under his arm and turned to leave when he heard a noise from behind him. He immediately reacted, dropping the brandy and spinning to face the threat. 4 people lay sprawled on the floor. Damocles was stunned. 4 strangers in the basement? There was no way that it was a coincidence that thieves would break in so soon after the Blighted Guardian. They must have had something to do with the attack, and he was going to make them pay. A smoldering rage welled up inside of Damocles' chest. His knuckles were white as he balled his fists so tightly that they shook. He would take them alive and get to the bottom of his mother's attacker. Before that, though, they would suffer. In the moment it took for him to assess the situation, he had already decided the stranger's fate. He drew his weapon and called upon his mother's espers to prepare for a fight. Okay, I was just making sure I was actually supposed to read that card. It is possible to skip the boss fight. Alright, now Damocles the character. Beloved son of Hyde. From a young age, Damocles had a passion for sports. He was always at some practice or another and was eager to participate in anything and everything. When he wasn't on the field, he'd been forced to deal with home. His stepfather was barely around, and his mother barely seemed to know he existed. When the Harbingers came for him, Damocles was excited. He knew that there was something more to his life than he had seen. He was sure that whatever was in store for him would fill the void he felt. When Damocles met his Midaran family, he was surprised. They were in charge of a small mining town and were well respected. He expected them to be stuffy dignitaries, but he was greeted by a warm couple who showered him with affection. He felt love from them that he had never known back on Earth, and Damocles embraced his new family completely. During his years at the Institute of Millennia, Damocles didn't spend a lot of time making good grades. Instead, he excelled in combat and became a skilled bellicose duelist. Though he made some friends, he said farewell as soon as he graduated and returned to Hyde. Knowing that it would be his responsibility to rule someday, Damocles watched the way Elias and his business partner Hendrix Patel ruled over Hyde. He quickly showed himself to share his parents' affinity for their people. Speaking of Hendrix, we got Blighted Hendrix. Traitorous conspirator. Hendrix sat with his head in his hands. He couldn't believe what he had done. Rivka was his dear friend, and he had doomed her to a painful death. He could imagine her deathbed, laying writhing in agony with her family watching her transform into a monster. The Heights had been like family to him, but he knew that this had to be done. Elias was blind, too loyal to Balthazar to realize his rule was dooming Alenia. Brahma was a strong kingdom, with thousands of years of history and connections to Middara's other great powers. They need not remain pariahs forever. Despite his resolve, Hendrik still wished Elias would see reason. He didn't want to kill his old friend. Some would call his actions treason, but he did what he had to do for the city. He could live with the guilt of betrayal, knowing that it was for the greater good. Hendricks didn't like working with the Grim Deacons, however. The Brahminian spies had contacted him with a plan to gain influence through Elenia's minds, and Hendricks had been eager to assist. The leader, a woman named Echo, was a little unhinged. Her eyes always looked hungry. She was unhappy that the Bloody Guardian that they released into the Hyde estate hadn't found the intended target, and wouldn't be satisfied with him sitting on the sidelines for much longer. His research into the blight had yielded results, and soon Echo would get her wish. He had developed a mutated strain of the parasite, and could easily get close enough to Elias to administer it and finish the job. Hendricks shifted uncomfortably at the thought of his wife, Tegan, finding out what he'd done. She wouldn't understand. It didn't matter, though. Hendricks would take action regardless of who it might hurt. He had to save Elenia while there was any kingdom left to save. Judas. Great Bounty Enforcer. Judas returned to the Great Bounty with his most recent quarry in tow. I have brought the guilty for judgment, he declared. The warden looked from Judas to his prisoner. Very well, he said, dropping a rough cloth sack onto the table between them. The crystal of a rich payment jingled inside. The guilty will come with us. Excellent work as always. The warden nodded, and a pair of armed guards dragged the sobbing prisoner away. Judas wasn't sure where they took the guilty, or what happened to them. He barely even cared about the payment. The law was its own reward. In the back of his mind, he knew that for every offender he captured, scores of criminals escaped justice. Nothing he did would change that. Still, it irked him that so many got away with spitting in the face of the law. With each bounty he claimed, he only felt more stridently that he must hunt. It was his singular purpose. Some of his colleagues accused him of being overzealous. He knew, however, that these things wouldn't wait. While the others may be well-intentioned, Judas felt only disdain for their lack of conviction. They couldn't hope to make a meaningful difference with their half-hearted efforts. Even worse were those that hunted simply for profit. While justice was served in the end, these soldiers of fortune were often barely better than those they pursued. Judas wondered if they didn't take bribes from their marks, accepting money to turn a blind eye. The very thought of it made him sick. If he ever saw such a thing, he would be sure to intervene. Judas sighed. Sometimes the weight of duty was very heavy. Despite the difficulty, he would persevere. It was only in unwavering obedience that justice could be served. Alright. Apparently I pulled out Rathlemorner twice. Alright, and then we got Quinn. The two twins both have the same backstory, so I only grabbed one of them. Savani Guardians. Their father made their legacy as agents of the Great Bounty, and Titus and Quinn were eager to follow in their footsteps. They would gain some experience accepting summons until they were ready to join the Great Bounty themselves. In the meantime, they would take whatever contracts came their way. They accepted every summons that they could, moving from contract to contract. Titus and Quinn wanted to make their fathers proud. To that end, they intended to find someone with the same insatiable ambition for greatness. Defeating common criminals and petty Arcala thugs was simply not enough. Eventually, this pursuit led them to a request from Rivka. They arrived to a young woman fighting for her life against a pack of Gavaden. They helped her drive off the monsters and were impressed with Rivka's prowess. She was adventuring in the wilds of Elenia alongside a group of close friends. Her expedition was intent on uncovering fortune, founding cities, and defying a neighboring kingdom's rule. It was exciting and incredibly dangerous. Titus and Quinn saw this as a perfect opportunity to offer their long-term services. A contract was signed and a deal struck. Titus and Quinn were at Rivka's disposal. Over the course of decades, Titus and Quinn served Rivka as Elenia grew into a kingdom. During that time, Rivka's espers became her most trusted allies and closest friends. Together, Titus and Quinn stood by Rivka's side as she struggled with love, politics, leadership, and combat. This personal growth changed the course of their lives, and the two began to forget their aims of joining the Great Bounty. They were happy here on Middara with Rivka. When Rivka was unexpectedly infected with the blight, Titus and Quinn were devastated. When Rivka's impending death on the horizon, there was little more they could do than offer comfort to her husband and son. When it was done, they would say their farewell to Elenia at last. So this is why Quinn, was it Quinn and sorry, let's do that. Titus and Quinn are not with Damocles because they're actually not Damocles' summons. They are Rivka, and once Rivka died, the contract was over, and so they just returned home. All right, I believe that's all the backstory stuff. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. As always, I apologize for all Rolf's mistakes. I'll try my best to keep up, but as always, I'll probably make some mistake here and there. It has been a while since I've messed with Chapter 4, but I do know kind of in general what's up ahead. So it's going to get pretty intense, and there's a lot of stuff to juggle. There are a lot of rules questions I ran into, and unfortunately I couldn't get responses back when I initially recorded them. So that's part of the reason why I went ahead and restarted. I got answers for majority of the things I had questions about, so hopefully things will go a little bit smoother. But until then, I am the Depressed Dealer. This was Middara. Hopefully you guys stick around, and I'll see you guys next time.